So we are on week 6 of the live cooking series now. Halfway through, almost halfway through July already, which is insane. So just more and more summer ingredients coming into season. And one of my favorites, one of my mom's favorites, she's on here now, is cherries. So we love sweet cherries. You'll find cherries in the summer, in season. You'll find different varieties of them. You'll see them anywhere from yellow all the way to more of this, deep red that's like almost purple. They're all delicious. They're all sweet. Some are more tart than others. So, similarly to other ingredients we've been talking about during this cooking series, now is the best time to try different ones that maybe you haven't tried before, because when they're in season, they are extra yummy. So if you've never tried the yellow cherries, this is a great time to test those out. But for this so you can use any kind of cherries for this recipe. I have just regular, red cherries here that I'm going to be using. But with all cherries, no matter what kind you're using, they all have a pit in the middle, right? And we don't want to put cherries on our flatbread that have a pit in the middle of them. So the first step in this recipe is to pit all of the cherries, to get those pits out. Okay, so getting to our flatbread. So we're making a sweet and savory roasted cherry flatbread today. So this would be really good. You could have this for breakfast. I had it for breakfast after I tested the recipe. Lunch, a snack, a little appetizer, a side dish to your dinner, however you want to eat it. And it's showcasing cherries in a different kind of way. So that's how I've been, doing a lot of the recipes for this cooking series, is showing you different ways to use these seasonal ingredients. So while cherries, when they're in season, are delicious on their own, when we roast them, it actually makes them even sweeter because it helps to caramelize the natural sugars that's in the cherries. Plus, we're also tossing them with some balsamic vinegar and honey, and that's gonna bring out a lot of different flavors here. So definitely playing around with cooking fruit in different kinds of ways. Using the grill for fruit in the summer is really nice. Doing different like fruit kebabs that you can throw on the grill. Cooking fruit, gives it an entirely different flavor and texture, so it can just kind of spice things up a little bit to give you a new way to eat your favorite summer fruits. So we're going to start by getting the cherries into the oven to roast them. You want to get your oven preheated to 400 degrees, and we're going to combine the cherries with, you want to use some sort of neutral flavored oil here. You can use olive oil, but olive oil will impart an olivey flavor into it. So if you don't want that olive oil flavor, you can use a neutral flavored oil here. And you want to use a higher heat oil because it's going in the oven at 400 degrees. So I'm using safflower seed oil. You could use sunflower oil, avocado oil, an organic canola oil, a vegetable oil, anything like that. And we're just going to toss so we have 2 cups of cherries. Also, I should mention, before we get started, you can use whatever kind of flatbread you like here. I use these whole grain naan breads. These are my favorite things to use for flatbreads. So the recipe, as it's written, will make 2 flatbreads of that size. So if you're using something bigger, like something that's like the size of a regular pizza crust, or maybe you're using pizza dough that you're rolling out to something bigger, it might just make 1 really large flatbread. You can kind of adjust the ingredients accordingly to whatever kind of flatbread you're using. So for this recipe, we have 2 cups of pitted cherries. So I already took the pits out. We have 2 cups of pitted cherries here. And we're going to mix them with 2 teaspoons of oil, whatever kind of oil you're using, 2 teaspoons of balsamic vinegar, and 2 teaspoons of honey. Also, just a trick here, I recommend doing the olive oil in the measuring spoon before the honey like I just did, because then it helps for the honey to easily slip out of the measuring spoon. That's just a good trick in general. Whenever you're using something sticky like honey, even if you're not using oil in the recipe, you can put a little bit of oil in, just a very light, like spread it with your finger, a very light coating of oil in the measuring cup or the measuring spoon, whatever you're using, and then that will help it just kind of fall right out of the spoon instead of you having to kind of dig it out of there. Okay, and then we're just gonna mix that up. I want to just get the cherries nice and coated here. And we're going to toss these on a parchment-lined baking sheet. They're going to go in the oven for about 10 minutes. Then we're going to take them out, give them a little toss, and put them back in for like 3 to 5 minutes. We want these to still hold their shape. We don't want them to, become like too mushy. So we don't want them to roast for too long, but enough that they get softened and they kind of caramelize a little bit. Plus this is all gonna go back into the oven on the flatbread to warm up. So they'll get another little cooking in there. Okay, so I have my parchment lined baking sheet here. And show you what it looks like here. We're just gonna spread these out nice and even on the baking sheet. You want to try to get them, not really touching too much. Okay. All right, so that's going in the oven. Okay. All right, so let's put the timer on for 10 minutes. Oops. Okay. Set that aside. Okay, so while those cook up, we are going to make our cheese mixture that's going to be spread right onto the flatbread. So I'm using a mixture here of goat cheese and ricotta cheese. You can kind of like play around with, if you don't like goat cheese, you can use all ricotta cheese, but mixing them together also kind of cuts back, dials back the flavor of the goat cheese if you're not a big goat cheese fan. So I tried it a few different ways and I really like the combination of them together. So we're using half a cup of the ricotta cheese. Measure that out. Okay. I'm just mixing everything together in a bowl here. Okay. And then we're using 2 ounces of goat cheese. So the reason I write it in the recipe as 2 ounces is because you'll usually find goat cheese like this in a log. We want the goat cheese like this. You don't want to get crumbled goat cheese because we want it to be able to spread. So when you buy it like this, it's, this is a 4-ounce log. So we're going to use half of the log. So I try to write things in a way that makes sense for how you would find the ingredients in the store. So we're just going to use half of this little log of goat cheese. Okay. Just plop that in there. All right. And then, just rinsing my hands. Okay. And then we're going to sweeten up the cheese a little bit. with some honey. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of honey here. So in the recipe is written as 4 teaspoons of honey total divided, right? So we use the first 2 teaspoons on the cherries to roast them, and then we're using the other 2 teaspoons here with the cheese. Okay, so adding 2 teaspoons of the honey. You could also, as kind of like a cheat to this recipe, you can find goat cheese that's already seasoned. You can find goat cheese that already has honey in it. You can find it that it has seasonings on the outside, because we're also going to be adding to this some fresh thyme. So we used thyme last week also, and I mentioned that thyme works really well with cheese. It's a really nice balance to cheese and to honey. The flavors just balance really well. So we're going to add 2 teaspoons of fresh thyme leaves into the cheese. So if you missed last week, I'll show you again how we do the thyme. So we have it's on this woody stem here, so we only want the leaves. So you hold it from the top and run your fingers down, and then you'll have just the leaves. So they do fall off really easily. So we want 2 teaspoons of that fresh thyme right into the cheese mixture with the honey. So yeah, so I was saying you could buy, like an already seasoned goat cheese, and kind of skip, adding the thyme yourself. You could get like an herby goat cheese and use that as well. The cherries are our seasonal ingredient for this recipe. So talk a little bit more about those. So cherries are particularly high in antioxidants. All fruits really have some antioxidants in there, but cherries happen to be very high in antioxidants. They also have a lot of anti-inflammatory properties. So they have a lot of heart protective benefits. They have been shown to help with certain inflammatory conditions like gout and things like that. So it never hurts to add something like this into your diet, With foods like this, like cherries that really are best when they're in season, stock up on them now and put them in the freezer. And then you have them through the winter months, through the cold winter months, you'll have your cherries to rely on. And then when they're frozen, you can use them in smoothies. You can defrost them and use them regular. You can, when they're frozen and defrosted, they kind of come out like jammy, and then they're really delicious to toss into yogurt, something like that. And you should pit them before you put them in the freezer. But that's just a good tip in general for some of your favorite summer produce is buy it now, stock up on it, and just stash a bunch of it in the freezer. Okay. All right, so we have our cheese mixture here, our ricotta cheese, goat cheese, honey, and fresh thyme. While we're waiting for the cherries to be done with their first 10 minutes, our other ingredient, which I've been using a lot in our recipes, is lemon zest. So again, I keep talking about the zest, but the zest just adds this super bright citrusy flavor that really makes it feel summery. So we're just using the lemon zest as a garnish when the flatbreads come out of the oven. When they're totally done, we're just going to sprinkle the lemon zest over the top, and it gives like this really nice pop of fresh flavor, because it can feel a little bit heavy and like decadent with the roasted cherries and the cheese. So then adding this fresh element on top as a garnish really, really kind of brings it home. So I've mentioned this when I've been zesting in the last few recipes. I like to use a microplane for zesting, but you could use whatever tool you have that works best for you. And I just zest right over a little container here. And like I mentioned, we want to just try to get that yellow part. So constantly be rotating the lemon as you're zesting. We don't want to go too far past that white part because then we get into kind of a bitter flavor. Break some zest here. So that's the first 10 minutes up on the cherries. So I'm going to pull those out of the oven, just give them a little toss. Okay, so you can see what they look like now. You just want to toss them around a little bit just so that we can get them caramelized. All right, and then back in the oven just for another 5 minutes. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to finish zesting this lemon. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so that's our zest. So we'll just set that aside until we are ready to garnish. Okay, so now we can prepare our flatbreads so that when the cherries come out, we're ready to top them. So we're just going to evenly spread the cheese onto both flatbreads here. Like I said, the flatbreads that I'm using, it makes 2. So if you're using something bigger, it might just be enough for 1. Okay, and we don't want a super thick layer of the cheese. We just want it to be a nice coating. Just spread that around. Because if it's too much cheese, then that kind of takes over. We want to really highlight the cherries and make sure that that it's not too much cheese spilling over. I like to leave a little bit of room at the edges, like it's a little crust. Okay, so that's good. So it's just, you can see it's just like a nice thin layer, not like overloaded with the cheese. And don't feel like you need to use all of it if you have a little bit left over. Okay. Okay, so that's that. And you can grill flatbreads too. If you're using your grill a lot in the summer, you can grill them and they're really good. So you can use like fresh pizza dough and you can grill it instead of cooking it in the oven, and it comes out totally different. It's a totally different flavor. Okay, so our flatbreads are ready to go. We have just another minute on those cherries, and then we're going to top the flatbreads with the cherries. So the way that I'm doing it here and the way the recipe is written, we just throw the cherries on the flatbread whole. If you could certainly cut them in half if you don't want to bite into a whole cherry, or if you're baking it for kids and you don't want them to, bite into a whole cherry and worry about them choking. You could definitely cut the cherries in half. But the way I'm going to do it, we're just going to put them on just whole as is. Okay. I'm gonna pull these guys out, and once the cherries come out of the oven, we want to lower our oven temperature to 350. So we're going to be putting the flatbreads into the oven just to get everything all warmed up, but 400 is a little bit high for that. So we want to just lower the temperature to 350 to put the flatbreads in. So we have our cherries now, all nice and, wait, it's hard for me to show you, but they're all nice and roasted. So I'm going to, let's take a new spoon, and we're going to spoon those right on top of our flatbread. So again, we're just evenly distributing them between the two flatbreads. Gosh, they smell so good. I'm gonna try to spread them out a little. Also, they're really hot when they come out of the oven, so you could let them rest a minute before you start handling them, but since we're doing this live like this, I'm just going for it. Okay. Delicious. Okay. Gotta find. Okay. There we go. Okay, so we have our flatbreads here, delicious, and we're ready to put them in the oven. So I just have the flatbreads sitting on a piece of parchment paper. I'm going to transfer them into the oven like this. You can put them on a baking sheet so it's easier for you to transfer if you want. You could also bake them directly on your oven rack, but it just gets a little bit hard to move them once the cherries are on there. So very gently transfer these to the oven. Okay. All right, and those are just going in for like 3 to 5 minutes. Everything is cooked, right? So we don't need them to be in there super long to cook. It's just long enough for the cheese to get a little bit melty and for the crust itself, for the flatbread itself, to get a little bit toasty and crispy. So that was going for a few minutes. And that's it. So once those come out, we are going to garnish with our fresh lemon zest. You can also garnish with some more fresh thyme, some more thyme leaves. And another really delicious optional garnish is if you have like coarse flaky sea salt, you could sprinkle that on the top. So that gives like a really nice like balance to the sweetness from those cherries. And when you bite into it, you also bite down on a piece of like flaky sea salt, the same way that you would like on a chocolate chip cookie or something. That sweet salty balance is really delicious. So if you have that, that would be a good addition as well. So the way that I take these guys out of the oven is I use my cutting board. The same way that if you would use like a pizza stone if you were making if you had that and you were making a pizza in the oven, as something to kind of like pull it out easily. So I just use this and I transfer the parchment paper directly onto the cutting board, and then you can just slice it up on the cutting board, serve it on the cutting board. It makes a kind of a little rustic appetizer for your next summer barbecue. Cherry. Here we go. So here they are. You can see like the cheese kind of melts off of it a little bit. So that's also why I don't want to put too much cheese, because you don't want it to totally drip off of it. Okay, and then we're just garnishing with a little lemon zest. Yum. Okay. All right, and a little bit more of our fresh thyme. And because the thyme leaves are so small, you don't need to chop them up at all. Just toss them right on there. And that is it. Beautiful roasted cherry flatbreads.